In this video, we're going to assume that you can factorise a quadratic equation, but we want to have a look at some of the odd cases, some of the slightly variations on that. Take this first one, for example. We're used to factorising or solving equations, quadratic equations, where we've got a quadratic on this side and 0 on this side. In this case, we've got part of the equation on this side and part of the equation on this side. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of everything that's on this side. So to get rid of this 2x, we need to subtract 2x from both sides. We're not changing the equation in any way, we're just taking the same away from both sides. So x squared plus 2x plus 10, we've got rid of the 2x, so equals 18. We need to get rid of this 18, so we're going to take 18 away from both sides. So we get x squared plus 2x, subtract 8 equals 0. And from this point on, we can treat it as we have before. We'll look to see if we can factorise it. If we can't factorise it, we can use the quadratic formula. In this case, we can factorise it. It becomes x minus 2, x minus 4 equals 0. And from that, we can find our solutions. Below here, we've got some slightly different examples. You can see in this case, we've got a quadratic, but it hasn't got an x term. It's got an x squared term, but it hasn't got an x term. Here we have an x squared, an x, and a number term. This x term is missing. We also notice that this number here is a negative square number. Now, this is a special case that we call the difference of two squares, and it can be very quickly factorised if we spot this pattern by saying x minus 4, x plus 4 equals 0. The 4 comes from the square root of 16, and notice one is negative and one is positive. We've got a very similar example here where you've got an x squared, take away a square number. We can factorise that in exactly the same way. X, take away the square root of 49, 7, x plus 7 equals 0. In both cases, we can quickly then find the solutions. We've got a very similar example in this one here. We're taking away a square number, but we've also got a square number in front of the x squared. We can treat this in a very similar way. The only difference in this case is you're not going to have just x, but in this case you're going to have the square root of 16, which is 4x at the start of each bracket. So 4x, take away 6, 4x, add 6, equals 0. The 4's come from being the square root of 16. The 6's come from being the square root of 36. Again, one is positive, one is negative. Now, the final quadratic equation we're going to have a look at. We've tried to factorise, we can't factorise. So what's the next thing we do? We look to see if we can use the quadratic formula. Best thing to do, even if you're given the quadratic formula, is to write the quadratic formula down on the page in your book to show the examiner you know what you're doing. So, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b, subtract 4ac all over 2a. Now all we need to do is make sure we identify the letters a, b and c correctly. A is how many x squared we've got. In this case we've got 1x squared. Don't be fooled into thinking this is a 0. Here the b is how many x's we've got, in this case 2. And c is the number we've got on the end. This is a negative 1. Don't be fooled into thinking that that's just 1. Then it's just a matter of plugging those letters, substituting those letters into the formula. Negative b, negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 4, minus 4 times a, which is 1, c, which is negative 1, all over 2 times a, which is 2 times 1, which is 2. With a bit of work, this becomes negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 8 over 2. With a bit more work, you see that 2 divided by 2 is 1, so negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And you can also look to see that the square root of 8 is the same as 2 times the square root of 2. Going back to your work on surds, all over 2. And actually the 2's cancel, so this simplifies to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 2. If you actually wanted to know what number that represents, plug it into your calculator. It will give you 2 solutions, which would obviously be a little less precise because you'd have to round them.